Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone. Well, a couple of days ago, HuffPost Politics posted what I think is a problematic video on their Facebook page, which was titled "Blatant Sexism is Alive and Well on Cable News." The reason I think it's problematic is because of the fact that they have lumped content together which is clearly not sexism, and also some content which is kind of questionable as to whether or not it is actually sexist, with genuine acts of sexism, and they've called all of those different things blatant sexism. And that's problematic because A, it's completely dishonest, and B, it completely undermines your cause. If you're someone who's trying to highlight sexism in modern culture and you want that to be reduced and you want to see less of it, which hopefully we all should, by highlighting acts which are not sexism and calling them sexism, you undermine your credibility. And people look at you and they go, you can't be trusted. You're not a reliable voice on this. And as we go through this video, I think you'll see that, particularly for HuffPost Politics, which is supposed to be dedicated to politics, some of what they're claiming here as sexism is actually, it's actually quite disingenuous and dishonest to them. And you'd think that an organisation dedicated to covering politics would actually know better. So let's watch the video now. I'll stop it after each clip and I'll tell you briefly whether I think it is sexist or not, and importantly, I'll tell you why I think the way I do about these issues. So let's get into it.
There's got to be some downside to having a woman president, right? Something that may not fit with that office.
Yep, so straight off the bat, that is a sexist comment. He is suggesting that because she's female, that her femininity somehow disqualifies her from holding the office of president, and that is sexism. It's as blatant as it gets, and I would suggest it's on the more serious end of the scale. It's not a minor throwaway comment. He's effectively suggesting that women are incapable of holding the top office in the land because they are not men.
And many other people do find Hillary Clinton's voice to be shrill. In fact, it sounds like a cat being dragged across a blackboard.
I disagree with him. I don't think her voice sounds particularly shrill at all, but this is not sexism. He's just making an observation. He's being rude. I think he's being insulting and he's being unfair, but he's not being sexist. It would be sexist if he said, well, all women have shrill voices, and because they have shrill voices, they should be excluded from the office of president. What he's doing is he's making a particular observation about a particular woman, which I think he happens to be wrong about, by the way, and the worst you could accuse him of here is being rude. It would be no different if he made this kind of statement about a man. There is no, it's just plain rude. He has not brought her sex into this issue at all. He's talking about her voice.
I would cast Philip Seymour Hoffman to play Hillary Clinton.
Okay, so this is definitely rude, it's definitely insulting, and again, I think he is being totally unfair, and in fact, it's kind of a really undignified thing, I think, to say on what is presumably supposed to be some sort of serious journalistic endeavour. But I'm not necessarily convinced he's being sexist here. We'd need more information. It could be sexist, it could be sexist, but we actually need more information, and we need to know more about his intent here. Regardless, it's definitely something rude and insulting that he said about her. And as I said, I don't think it's fair at all. But for it to be sexist, he would have to be intending to make some sort of statement about her sex that is derogatory. It seems to me that he is making statements about her looks that are derogatory, and that is a different case, obviously.
Nancy Pelosi, she's got a pretty good poker face, I think. Mainly because it's now looking like this all the time.
That is not sexist. Once again, it's rude and it's insulting, and you can make, I think, a very valid case that any sort of serious journalistic endeavour should not be engaging in this sort of stuff. It just lacks dignity, and it certainly seems to be a waste of good journalistic talent and a media outlet to be doing this kind of insulting stuff around public figures. But it's not sexist. He hasn't mentioned her sex at all. He's made a comment again about her looks. And I don't know anything about that particular host, but I'm guessing that he probably does and makes those kind of statements all the time about both men and women, rather than simply singling out women for these kind of childish insults.
That woman looks way out of her depth over there. Just the way she delivers, it just doesn't look like she has the gravitas for that job.
That is not sexist. He has critiqued her job performance and he has suggested that because of her performance in the role that she holds, she lacks the necessary, what he considers to be the prerequisites that are required to actually execute that job well. That is not sexism. That's exactly how men are evaluated all the time in the real world. And if feminism is about males and females receiving equal treatment, then he is doing what males do to other males all the time, and also females do to males all the time. They critique people and their suitability for a role based on how they execute the role. He has not said anywhere that her gender or her sex is something to do with her ability to perform the role. Instead, he has singled out specific things. He talks about gravitas there. He has not indicated though that women lack the gravitas to hold that role. Instead, he is talking about a specific person and suggesting that they are not qualified and their delivery is too stunted, and they're not suitable for that role. That's not sexism.
Let me explain instead of talking over me, okay?
Once again, the clip we've been shown is not sexism. You have a typical type of interaction between a political journalist and a politician. They spar, they go at each other all the time like this, and what you have a lot more now is journalists who try and talk over the top of, they really try and press politicians, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, because you do want advocates who are working for us, who are challenging politicians and really sort of putting the heat on to ascertain whether we're getting the truth here and we're getting the best out of our elected officials. But this is very typical, and what happens is you have journalists who go into attack dog sort of mode. Both males and females do this. It is the sort of status quo. They go after the subject, and what you have is the subject, the politician, or the representatives who respond in kind, and this is typical of this sort of interaction. In this particular case, it just seems he was trying to make a point, and she was saying, she was just constantly speaking, and he felt that he wasn't able to make his point, or perhaps he could have been using one of those classic old tactics where you basically try and throw the journalist off their game by suggesting that they're being unfair to you and they're not letting you actually speak. And it's a deliberate tactic that normally results in a journalist giving you a bit more space as the interview progresses to actually speak your mind. But there is nothing at all blatantly sexist in that clip that we were shown.
Carol, you're beautiful, but you have to be honest.
Okay, that was sexism. He's made a derogatory comment. This is a typical kind of comment. Oh yeah, you're a beautiful looking dame, but... in other words, you don't have the brains of us men folk. It's sort of, this is a well-known and established way of talking down to women. And I think, to be fair, that's a classic case of sexism that we've been showing there.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Calm down a bit here, Kelly.
What seems to be happening here is, again, classic political journalist interaction. He feels that he's not being given the room to say what he wants to say. She's really pressing him, so he's hushed her. He's said, look, you got to let me speak, and he's just done it in a very, I guess, what would you call it, a dramatic kind of fashion. He's actually put his fingers to his lips and shushed her like you would shush a child. But there's no indication at all that he is doing that because he thinks that women need to be shushed. And that's something that the HuffPost is inferring and reading into that particular action. But once again, logical discourse actually dictates that you don't infer what is unknown, that you actually ascertain whether or not what a particular person's intent is and what they're actually meaning, rather than just assuming. Otherwise, you're creating a straw man that isn't actually real and doesn't represent what was really going on.
Stop. Hey, can you turn her microphone off, please?
No.
Turn her microphone off so I can talk.
Once again, there's no indication that he's being sexist here. He feels that he wants to say what he wants to say. There's not just one journalist, but multiple journalists. I think he's signaling her out because she was leading the charge. I can't tell. There's just so much of this clip that's missing. And this is one of the big problems I have with this video. The narrative is not particularly clear, and it's hard to get an honest picture of what's actually going on in some of these clips because we're just not shown enough information. So technically, it's not very well put together in that regard. Which means it could well be dishonest, because if you see more of the context, it might actually make a lot more sense, and you might realise, this isn't actually sexist at all. But what he's doing here is he's saying, hey, let me speak. And he's got frustrated, and he's asked if someone could turn her microphone off because he considers her to be the dominant force that is preventing him from speaking. There's no indication, though, that this is sexist at all. Instead, quite possibly, he would have said exactly the same thing and reacted exactly the same way if one of the male journalists had been pressing him just as hard. So once again, there's no actual blatant sexism shown in that particular clip.
I haven't heard it, and I know a lot of people who have not heard it.
Well, maybe that's the problem.
I don't even understand why that clip was included in this video. There is nothing that, on the face of it, is even remotely sexist in that clip. She's made a statement he disagrees with. He's responded. That's how human interaction takes place. Unless, of course, we're now expected to believe that it is sexist for a man to actually engage with a woman on an equal footing in that type of context, that he's supposed to just sit there and let her do all the talking, which actually kind of seems a bit sexist in itself, because the implied suggestion there, of course, is that females are somehow they're disadvantaged. They have some sort of delicate snowflake constitution, and that they'll become all discombobulated if men actually engage with them as equals. So it's best to treat them like delicate flowers and to actually not do any talking at all unless they let you talk, which clearly is just absurd and bizarre.
Why do you suggest she doesn't do anything other than talk about her service?
Ashley.
That's petulant. That's childish. There's no indication, again, that this is sexist. It's quite conceivable, based on what I'm seeing in front of me, that this particular character does this with every journalist who he's not getting on with. There's no indication here. They're inferring again. It could be this being sexist, but we just don't know that. So to call it blatant sexism is problematic. It actually just seems to me like someone who's being childish again, who's trying to get a word in edgeway, that typical sort of discourse that now takes place so often in the media, and I find so frustrating, because you actually don't get the answers you want to get when the journalist is doing all the talking and talking over the subject. And it happens all the time. Both males and females do this all the time in journalism now, and I find it really frustrating, because you obviously want to get information, but you can't actually get information if the person's not allowed to speak and respond.
You are fascinated with sex and you don't care about public policy.
It is absurd that that clip was even included in this video. And I know it was absurd because I've seen that full interview with Megyn Kelly and Newt Gingrich. And that interview, that very short clip, makes it sound like he was throwing out some sort of throwaway sexist insult, as if women are obsessed with sex. That is not at all what was going on. If you go and watch that full interview, you'll see for yourself that he was basically suggesting that she had an axe to grind with Donald Trump, and she had focused in on these sexual allegations, and that her and Trump, and it is no secret, there does seem to be a long-running feud between the two of them, that basically she had focused in on these things and become obsessed with these allegations, and it was really just about her with her own particular agenda, and she's really still smarting from that debate engagement that they had some months ago, where they sort of both stood off against each other. And if you see the whole interview, you'll realise pretty quickly, no, there was nothing at all sexist in that comment. There's a much bigger context that we have not been shown, and therefore it's completely dishonest to even include it in this video.
Ashley, she was on TV a month and a half ago. Ashley, you ready?
Again, typical politician media engagement. There is nothing blatantly sexist in what's going on there. You can call it childish, but there's nothing blatantly sexist about what's going on there.
Don't be naive. You're a very naive person.
Yes, you're a very naive person. Well, from Donald Trump, that's one of probably his milder insults. But that's what Donald Trump does. He talks down to people. That is his particular communication style. Regardless of how you feel about his particular communication style, he does that with everyone. So it's pretty hard to make the case that this is blatant sexism when he does that to all sorts of journalists and people, even his own political peers. On stage, live in debates, he talks to in that same fashion. So I think you're pretty hard-pressed to try and claim that this is blatant sexism. It would be sexism if he singled out one sex, the female sex in this case, for that kind of treatment. But he doesn't. He does this to everyone.
I think it's a very rude question, to be honest with you.
That is another classic example of dishonesty in this particular video, because if you watch that whole Trump interview, which by the way is one of his more reserved and mild interviews, he's actually quite toned down compared to some of the other stuff he said. He's actually responding to a specific question that she keeps pressing, which I think, to be fair, was just a classic case of a journalist who's decided that it's her job to go after Trump. And there's a lot of this going on in this election cycle, and it's really problematic. And maybe I'll do a future video on it, because I think one of the big problems in this election cycle is the way that the media have effectively decided that they are now meant to stop Donald Trump from being elected, which is not what journalists are supposed to be doing. And this is not about whether you support him or not. That's just not what good journalism is, and it's really problematic when journalism becomes propaganda. And she was acting in a way that was more like how a propagandist would act or an activist would act, not a journalist. And she kept pressing an issue over and over again, and he came back in a very calm and what I think is a very calm and fair kind of way, and he responded how he felt, in accordance with how he felt he was being treated. That's not sexism, though. It just isn't sexism to do that to another person.
Try getting it out.
I'll get it out.
I mean, I don't know if you're going to put this on television, but you don't even know what you're talking about. Try getting it out. Go ahead.
Once again, that's how Donald Trump speaks to people. There's nothing to indicate that he's saying, oh, well, you don't know what you're doing because you're a woman, which would be sexist. He's just talking to her the way in which when he engages in conversational combat with people, this is how he operates. He does it with everyone, male, female, rich, poor, celebrity, a person who's totally unknown. That's what Donald Trump does. So, once again, I don't think you can say that this is a blatant act of sexism.
Such a nasty woman.
So he's called her a nasty woman. He calls his political opponents names. That's one of the negative hallmarks of the Donald Trump campaign that people have critiqued, and I don't have a problem with people critiquing that. But it's absurd to say this is blatant sexism. He does this to everybody.
Oh, damn glad that you can never be my wife, because I surely wouldn't have to listen to that prattle from you every day.
Okay, so I've mused long and hard about this particular comment, and it's kind of hard to gauge whether he's actually being sexist here or whether he's just being rude and arrogant, because it's not clear that he's saying something derogatory about her because she is a woman. He's making a comment about her, a rude comment to her based on what she's saying. We don't know what she said either, which is kind of frustrating. Again, it would be nice to actually see what she said and what he was actually responding to, whether there was a particular tone or a particular statement that she made that might have had us go, oh, okay, that puts a different spin on this. I'm not sure. But I'm kind of two minds on this comment because of the fact that, as I said, to me it seems like someone who is being arrogant and insulting rather than specifically singling out her sex as something that he's targeting here for some sort of derogatory comment. Yeah, I mean, he's made a comment about not being married to her, but I don't think you can say that every comment or insult that includes statements about marriage that's directed from a male to a female is automatically an act of sexism, is it? So I don't know. Maybe I'll leave that up to the viewers to decide because I'm not 100% sure about that one.
Here's a question that we're almost hesitant to ask, but it's a growing trend in America, so we will. Are female breadwinners a recipe for disharmony within the home?
I don't think this clip should have even been included in this video because there is nothing sexist about asking that question. It's a particular type of tactic that journalists use on these sorts of shows to try and draw the viewer in. They ask a provocative question, then they have some sort of discussion or article or something that's presented, and the whole idea is the viewer is supposed to be drawn into that, almost like a silent member of the discussion panel to sort of engage and invest themselves in what's going on the screen in front of them. But there's nothing sexist about asking that question. You might not like that question, but I actually think it's kind of important for societies to ask themselves these kind of important questions about certain practices and ideas and concepts that they've just embraced, possibly without even really thinking too hard about it. It is important, I think, to keep questioning ourselves in that way and saying, is this a good thing or not? And surely, by the way, if you think there's nothing wrong with this, then shouldn't you be able to defend your position? You wouldn't be too worried, I would have thought, by someone asking that question. If you genuinely believe it's a silly question to ask, surely it'll be quite easily to refute and to destroy that particular idea if logic and the evidence sits on your side of that question.
Women have become the breadwinners in this country, and a lot of other concerning and troubling statistics.
So that seems like blatant sexism to me. But I have a bit of an issue with the way they've put this particular segment of the video together. They've lumped a whole lot of short segments, very short segments from different shows together, and there's no real attempt to discern and make a distinction between what guests, people who are invited guests on these shows, are saying and what the hosts or the editorial boards of these shows actually believe about these issues. And that's kind of important because this video is angled apparently about how sexism is alive and well on cable news, but can you really accuse a show of being sexist if they have a guest on who says outlandish things? Because surely the whole point of free and open discourse is actually you're supposed to have a free and open discourse, and that means you've got to leave room for error and for people who say outlandish things and even wrong things and things that you might disagree with staunchly. So are they suggesting here that these people should not be allowed on these shows unless they agree with everything that the people who made this video agree with? It's kind of, to me, that's kind of a troubling little aspect of this particular segment, but let's carry on anyway.
Women should be at home with the kids. They're happier there.
So that's typical Gavin McInnes. Gavin McInnes is known as a provocateur. He is like Milo Yiannopoulos. He's a guy who deliberately says provocative things. They do it in a very cheeky and impish kind of way. There is an almost satirical quality to what they're saying. But the whole idea is they go to these outlandish and provocative statements to try and provoke and challenge the ideological status quo. You might not like that style. You don't have to agree with the ideas he's putting forward. That's the whole idea, isn't it? Free and open discourse. We're free to disagree. But the point is, I think it's a little bit unfair to put Gavin McInnes in this context, because the implication here is that he's some sort of serious social scientist who's trying to make serious statements. If you know Gavin McInnes, you know that he's a provocateur, and provocateurs really, I think, need to be treated in a different kind of way, and you need to evaluate what they're saying slightly differently. I mean, you evaluate the content, sure, but the way they say things is obviously is deliberately provocative.
The woman is the primary breadwinner. You're seeing the disintegration of marriage.
So that piece there is a little bit unclear. I'm assuming, on the face of it looks sexist, because what he seems to be saying is that having a female as a primary breadwinner is responsible for the disintegration of the family. If he's saying that, that's completely not true, but it is sexist. He's blaming women for something that they should not be blamed for. But it's kind of not clear. He may actually be listing problems or symptoms that he thinks are part of a much bigger problem. It's kind of not clear because we're not given the full context. But on the face of it, that does look like a sexist comment.
You would be much happier at home with a husband and children.
Oh, boy.
Once again, Gavin McInnes being a provocateur, which is what he does. You can even tell by the style of delivery. That's what he's doing here. He's trying to be deliberately provocative. And saying that, he is provoking a discussion about an important topic. Have we undervalued motherhood? Have we sold women down the river? By selling them a vision of femininity which says being in the boardroom is just as important and just as fulfilling as having children and being a mother is. Because and these are some pretty big issues that don't just have a bearing on women and their own personal happiness and personal fulfillment, but they also have a bearing on wider society. There's a much bigger discussion about, what are my obligations to my society versus what about my own personal self-gratification? Which one should be given precedence? And that's a much bigger debate, but Gavin is provocatively trying to raise those issues. And as I said, he does this in a provocative kind of way.
Something going terribly wrong in American society, and it's hurting our children.
I'm guessing, again, it's not quite clear here, but I'm guessing that's the tail end of that previous clip, and what he's trying to say is that woman being the breadwinner is hurting children and it's destroying our society. If that's the case, that's not true, and it's sexist. It's blaming women for something that's not true. However, without the rest of the interview to give context, it's not quite clear. For all we know, and based on the fact that I know some of these other clips, I have seen the full interview and they have unfairly represented him, it's possible we're not seeing the full picture here. But on the face value of it, that guy is definitely being sexist by claiming women are responsible for the downfall of society by going out into the workforce and becoming the primary breadwinner in a home.
Women were much happier when housewives were glorified.
Again, Gavin McInnes being Gavin McInnes, and again, I actually think he's raising some important and provocative comments here that are worthy of societal discussion. Have we undersold women? Have we undersold motherhood? Have we sold women down the river in such a way that actually is undermining their ability to find fulfillment, that is not helping us as a society? So once again, there's a bigger context here that needs to be included in this discussion rather than just saying, oh, blatant sexism.
Male typically is the dominant role. The female, it's not antithesis or it's not competing, it's a complementary role.
Okay, that statement is just far too short and too vague to even know what he's actually trying to say. You definitely need context before you can make an assessment of whether or not he's being sexist there. He might be using terms that you don't like. But there's just not enough context there for us to even, for all we know, he was defending women in the workforce. And he was making a statement about people who attack women in the workforce, and he was sort of presenting their arguments. We just don't know. So, and even then, listening to that very brief statement, I'm still sort of struggling to get my head around what exactly he meant. I'm kind of maybe guessing he's talking about male-female complementarity and how it's not necessarily been the best thing for men to become disconnected from meaningful work that allows them to provide for their family. But even then, I'm assuming and inferring a whole lot of things I just don't know. So I don't know whether it's fair to include this clip. You actually need more of a statement to ascertain what the heck he was even talking about there.
Didn't men give you the kitchen?
Okay, so this definitely seems like a sexist comment. And by the looks of it, I don't know, was it a poor attempt at humour? Again, it would be really good if they actually gave us more of the context and more of the actual interview, because for all we know, that one isolated comment has completely misconstrued what he was actually saying. Maybe he was making a joke about men who think that women are only supposed to be in the kitchen and nothing more. We don't know. We just don't know. And for those of you who are saying, oh, well, you should just accept them at their word. Well, as I said, there's a couple of interviews here where I know that they have dishonestly misrepresented the context of what happened already. And also, I think you're a little bit naive to take, particularly someone like the Huffington Post, which definitely has a progressive agenda, to simply take them at face value and not challenge whether or not there's more context here, I think is just a little bit naive.
If you want to yap out the commercials, go watch it on the other TV with the ladies in the kitchen.
Okay, so let me let you in on a little secret here. Anyone who is married or has been in a long-term relationship or who's just lived a little bit of life knows that, generally speaking, males have a particular affinity for big and certain types of sporting matches, and they just love to watch them. We also know that males and females often get together where a sporting match is being watched on a television. And as a general rule, generally speaking, females don't share the same sort of interest in those sporting matches as what men do. And that's good. That's the spice of life. It's variety and it's all good and it's the way it's supposed to be. But there are often cases where males and females find themselves at a party or an event together, and the males just want to watch what they think is the most important sporting event in the world, uninterrupted and without any distractions. The females don't share that same interest, and so some might argue, engage in the higher calling. They sit there while the males are trying to watch their television sporting event, and they start to converse with each other, and some men find this really distracting and get upset by it. This is life, people. Get over it. And this guy's just made a silly joke about a very minor and consequential and passing joke. Clearly this is meant to be an attempt at humour. It's light-hearted puff piece. Look at the title across the bottom, Surviving a Super Bowl Party. And he's made a silly light-hearted joke about something that happens all across the world in all sorts of different cultures, all sorts of different sporting events all the time. Men get annoyed when women talk because they're not interested in that sporting event across their event. Okay, it's a silly throwaway line.
Women are everywhere. We're letting them play golf and tennis now. It's out of control.
You know what?
Okay, so I guess they've decided to include this because they think that it's part of some bigger narrative and injustice they see in the world, but I'm really struggling with this one. The simple fact is he made a silly, throwaway, quippy comment. Are we really supposed to be that delicate now that we're meant to be offended and we're meant to consider that kind of a silly, throwaway quip to be some sort of a great injustice in the world? To me, it sort of seems a little bit too much like first world wealthy problems, where we get obsessed with these silly little things. Like a guy making a throwaway comment, which, to be fair, it's kind of almost sounds like it's a parody of people who are sexist. what's going on in the world? Yeah, they're playing our sports. Next thing they'll want the vote. Either way, I really struggle to see why you'd be taking offence with such a silly and inconsequential quip.
You in Whole Foods searching for milk. That's a great image.
Okay, so this just kind of seems a little bit creepy and kind of weird. To me, it's just creepy and weird and not funny, or maybe not creepy, maybe awkward. I don't want to accuse the man of something that he wasn't intending, but it's kind of weird. I'm not even sure of the context, or, is he referencing some well-known sexist joke there and trying to make sexist claims about them? I'm just struggling to see now. I think they're really starting to scrape the bottom of the barrel here to try and find proof of some sort of misogynistic anti-woman crusade that exists on these channels.
One kid on their credit card, 99 cents.
You hope not.
They're worried about their wives' $100.
I'm prepared to let the viewers decide whether or not they think this one is sexist, because it just seems to me that he's not saying there's a problem with women putting money on the credit card. He actually seems to be saying there's a problem with the amount. 99 cents doesn't bother them, but $100 does. And to me, it's kind of inconsequential that he's used the example of a wife who's gone and spent $100 on a credit card that her husband doesn't think she should have spent. Maybe you could make a big deal out of that, but once again, I think you're really starting to scrape the bottom of the barrel when clearly what he's trying to do is compare two different amounts of money rather than the action involved. And he's saying 99 cents, yeah, no one worries about that, but $100 people get upset about. He's just, at worst, I think he's chosen perhaps a poorly worded and poorly thought out example that certain outrage warriors were always sort of going to get upset about him saying.
Is there something about the female brain that is a deterrent for getting on board with tech?
Okay, so first of all, I don't think it's sexist to actually ask a question. He's asking a question to try to draw out debate and discussion. He's not making a positive affirmation or statement or declaration here. He's asking a question. It is not sexist to ask these kinds of questions. And if you actually look at the little tagline at the bottom of the video, you will see, quite interestingly, that the discussion seems to be, should tech companies feel obligated to put women on their boards? Now, what it seems to me then, when you put that context into that little clip, it seems that what he's suggesting here is that maybe women just aren't interested in being on the boards of tech companies because it doesn't excite them. Is that an evil question to ask? Is that an injustice to ask that question? No, it is not. To me, it's kind of the equivalent of asking the question, is there something about the male brain that means that they're just not that on board with women's issues or feminist studies? And therefore, should feminist studies organisations or, feminist organisations be required to put males on their board? To me, it's so innocuous and silly to even include this in this video because I don't think it's sexist to actually ask the question.
Liberal women and feminist women particularly, they're looking to be offended every 2 minutes.
Okay, so there is kind of an irony here. The Huffington Post is I don't know if it's all female, but certainly predominantly female editorial board, and they've produced a video that really is supposed to make you feel some sort of outrage and upset. And they've included a comment about someone talking or suggesting that progressive females seem to be upset all the time, and every 5 minutes they're upset about something new. I think, to be fair though, where it does get sexist is that this isn't just a female issue. I think progressives, both males and females, are now notorious for taking offence at all sorts of things all of the time. There has become a sort of grievance gravy train now that a lot of people seem willing to climb on at the drop of a hat. So I think the problem is, of course, he singled out just female progressives when in actual fact both males and females do this.
Every metric, men have it worse off. We're more likely to get raped if you include prison. We're more likely to be assaulted. We're more likely to die. We're more likely to commit suicide.
Okay, so not only is there nothing sexist in what he said there, all of that is true. All of that is true. And It's kind of interesting that they've even included in this video. It suggests that maybe they don't know the facts. Because when you actually do, the only thing that some people might have thought was controversial was his first statement, but when you include prison populations, men are far more likely to become the victims of sexual assault and rape if you include male prison population along with general male population. Now you can argue whether or not that's a fair enough thing to do and whether we should be more nuanced in our statistics. Fine, I've got no problem with that. But every statement of fact that he's made there is true. It's absolutely true. So I'm not sure. Are they trying to suggest now that the truth is a blatant act of sexism? Because that's kind of problematic. In fact, it's extremely problematic when you think about what he's listing. There are some serious statistics that affect men in a very problematic kind of way.
You were making love with your boyfriend, Andrea. If you're making love with your boyfriend,
all right, Bo.
And then your phone goes off, it's interrupted, right?
Okay, so I'm not sure how this is blatant sexism. Are they saying that the fact that he's talked about her boyfriend, or the fact that he's talked about that she might have sexual activity with another person is sex? I'm just not sure here. To me, it just seems like a guy who comes across a little bit sleazy, to be fair. It's a crass statement to make. I don't think it seems to be a very undignified way of actually talking about what was supposed to be the topic at hand. But I'm struggling again to see how this is particularly sexist. Are they trying to suggest that he wouldn't talk to males this way? I don't know. Looking at that guy, I actually suspect he would. So, once again, I'm struggling to see how this is solid evidence of blatant sexism.
Look at what you're wearing, as opposed to sensible clothes.
Okay, so they've decided to include a clip relating back to one of the most absurd stories that ever made its way into the media in the last year or two. And it was the claim that was, absolutely stupid claim that was made, that the temperature of air conditioning in most office spaces is some sort of act of sexism against females. It was the most absurd and bizarre claim ever, and it sort of suggests how deficient our modern mainstream media has become. The fact that this thing got so much coverage when you consider what the claim being made was. Now, in this particular clip we're being shown, it's kind of hard to say whether he's accusing the host of not wearing sensible clothing or whether he's saying just in general terms, if you've got a problem with the temperature in the office, don't claim that it's sexist. Wear more sensible clothing. Like maybe the issue is the fact that you haven't actually got enough layers on and that this is not an act of sexism. And to be fair, he's not wrong, and it's not an act of sexism at all to make that statement when he's talking in more general terms like that. It just boggles the mind that people would even think that the temperature of air conditioning is somehow an act of, misogynistic oppression of women. It is just... Let's move on.
Lena Dunham calls.
Rick, will you come over to talk about Lenny Kravitz and I'll mention your book?
Again, I'm not sure why they've chosen to include this clip, because there is nothing blatantly sexist in what he has said here. He's made fun of Lena Dunham. It's not sexist to make fun of another person. You might argue it's rude and childish and it's not very fair, but it's not sexist to make fun of another person.
I don't think anybody would be standing with Wendy in Texas if she, weren't a handsome woman.
That's a sexist statement. What he's saying is that the only reason that she has support is because of the fact that she's good looking. And if she wasn't good looking, no one would even bother supporting her. So, yep, that clearly seems to meet the definition of what I think is sexism.
Let's take a second and think about Molly's quad development.
Once again, we need more context. What was the context? Was this in a much bigger story or article? Had she been making comments about her own quads and drawing attention that we don't know? So we sort of don't know the context, which doesn't help here. Technically, this is not a well-made video. If you take it in isolation, though, this does seem like a sexist comment to make. He has singled out his female co-host for a comment about her quads. But in saying that, was it just that he was thinking about the person who was closest to him? What if he had singled out his male co-host and made the same comment? Would we have considered it sexist? Maybe in another context, if he was sitting next to his male co-host and his male co-host was obviously closer to him and therefore perhaps more likely to come to mind a bit quicker, he might have singled him out instead. I'm just not sure that there's enough information here to actually say that this is blatant sexism, what we're seeing in this particular clip.
What do I look like?
Farrah Fawcett wannabe.
Okay, so what do I look like? And he says a Farrah Fawcett wannabe. I'm not sure that's sexist. It's certainly insulting. I mean, he's being rude to her. But I don't know if that's blatant sexism, is it? Because she kind of has got a bit of a look that does look a little bit like Farrah Fawcett. You could maybe make that comparison. But he doesn't seem to be suggesting that her sex is the issue here. She's a female who looks like Farrah Fawcett, and so he's made a rude comment about her being a Farrah Fawcett wannabe. I don't know, unless he was meaning to be derogatory about the fact that females can't be journalists or something, or that they can't think intelligently about these issues. Maybe that is what he's intending, and that would be sexism. The problem is they haven't given us enough information here because the clip is not full enough. So once again, the technical fault of this video actually undermines the case they're trying to make here.
Favor pretty much abortion at any time for any reason, and they hide behind the women's health issue, but that could be a migraine headache.
The use of the migraine headache as an example was clearly not the most well thought out one, but he's in the heat of, I'm assuming it's live television, and he's making a comment there. He's looking for to make an important statement here, that when you create an exemption around abortion for women's health, you can get abuse of that exemption, and people start using very minor and inconsequential things and claiming that they are serious health issues that give justification for what are effectively nothing more than social abortions. That is a well-known fact. It happens a lot in my country. We know that happens. Now, they've chosen to signal this clip out, I'm assuming because of the comment about the migraine headache, or it possibly could be because of the fact that they are so committed to a pro-choice stance that they just don't like the fact that he's talked about abortion. But in actual fact, what he's saying there is a valid point, that these sorts of health exemptions are abused by people all the time, and they are used for social reasons, not for legitimate health concerns.
Are you gonna cry?
Okay, so he said, what are you gonna cry? He's yelled it out. I'm assuming he's talking to the woman here. That does seem to be a sexist comment on the face of it, because it seems to, what the implication here is, it seems to be that he's sort of saying, well, women cry at the drop of a hat and they can't foot it with men. There's kind of an irony, though, in the fact that they've included this clip, because they've included other clips which give rise to the suggestion that they think women should be treated as special snowflakes. And here's a guy actually suggesting the same thing, that women are special snowflakes and that they cry at the drop of a hat and they can't handle, engaging in robust dialogue with men. So, yeah, it's kind of, in many ways it's kind of confusing that they've included this clip, because it does seem to point, ironically, to the flaw in their particular reasoning with some of these clips. But it's absolutely, on the face of it, if he's talking to that female, there does seem to be blatant sexism going on here in what he's saying to her.
Any women who get pregnant are blasted out of their minds when they have sex and not going to use birth control anyway.
This is another example which I think is sexism. He's highlighting a real issue, which is drunken sex, often promiscuous sex, and, the flow and effect of increased pregnancy rates as a result of that. But he singled out just females here. In actual fact, males and females having consensual sex are both responsible agents in that particular act. And I don't think it is at all fair to single out only females and suggest that somehow that this is their issue and their problem.
Miserable. You would be so much happier with kids around you tonight. Imagine coming home, mommy's home.
Okay, so this is just Gavin McInnes again, doing what Gavin McInnes does, making these provocative statements. But to be fair, I don't think he's necessarily wrong in what he says either. I think for the majority of women, they would find far more happiness in motherhood and having children to come home to who love them than the sort of mundane grind, no matter how important the job is, of the daily 9 to 5 sort of routine. And it gets back to that question again of, have we undersold the beauty and the profound importance of motherhood and the fulfillment that's actually found in that profound gift.
Migraines may ensue, or you'll bleed from your eyes and your nose, or whatever.
Oh my God.
No.
So yet again, we have another example of this technical problem I was talking about earlier, where they have pulled out this very short clip, and there's so little context, it's not clear what he's actually talking about or what's actually going on here. Is he referring to menstrual bleeding? It seems that maybe he could be, but It's still not clear from this clip. This is technically a very poorly edited together video in this regard. Some of these clips, and this one is probably one of the worst examples. Now, she's reacted negatively, his co-host has reacted negatively to what he said, which leads us to think maybe he was talking about menstrual bleeding. But it's not 100% clear that is what he's talking about, and I'm not sure what the heck the context is. I don't know. I mean, and if he is talking about menstrual bleeding, was he actually intending to be derogatory about female menstrual cycle, or was he just awkwardly fumbling his way through it? Look, I'm still not clear because I haven't seen the original, and to be fair, they've presented this video saying here's a whole lot of examples of blatant sexism. I think you actually need to back up your case with solid evidence rather than just these very short snippets where the context to what we're seeing is actually missing.
Know your role and shut your mouth.
Okay, so yeah, this is definitely a case of blatant sexism. And not only is it problematic, this to me is the worst example in the whole video. Because not only is there an issue with what he's saying, it's also how he's saying it. There is a real hostile and very aggressive tone that he is taking towards that female that he is addressing there. And if this was one of my daughters or my wife that was being talked to in this way, I can tell you what right now, that guy, I'd be having some very, very serious words to him about his conduct because, oh boy, that really is unacceptable. And like I said, I think this is the most serious example that they've actually shown because of not just the content, but the way in which he is speaking to those women.
Come in closer. Really close.
What are you doing?
Just kidding. You look great.
Is he trying to make some sort of joke about it, whether or not she looks beautiful, or whether she's got skin blemishes? I'm not quite sure again of the context. And without that context, it's hard to gauge what's going on and whether there is blatant sexism here or just some poorly thought out joke relating to a piece that they've just had. For all I know, they were just talking about some new article about face blemishes or something, and does this affect female performance in the workplace? I don't know what the heck they were talking about. So I'm a little bit confused by that, and once again, that poor technical editing comes to the fore to leave me just going, I don't know whether this is sexist or not, because I don't know enough about this clip.
And it makes sense that there would...
Says
polls.
Who?
Most of them. All of them?
Says who?
Polls. I just told you. I answered your question.
Okay. Which polls?
All of them.
Okay. And your question is?
Okay, so this is not sexism. This is typical journalist-politician interaction again. It's exactly how these interactions take place. And I'd be willing to bet you $100 that he would talk down to a male journalist if there was a male journalist asking him and challenging him in that exact same way. He's just not very good at media engagement, and he's got frustrated, and he's allowed his frustration to actually take control when he should be actually engaging with the journalist with some strong talking points. This is just a classic failure of media engagement, but I don't see any blatant sexism at all. Unless, of course, they're suggesting that now that female reporters are supposed to be treated as snowflakes and you're not supposed to disagree with them and make silly throwaway comments like this and have bad media engagement. Yeah, look, I'm sorry, this just is not a strong example at all of blatant sexism. And therein, like I said, lies so much of the problem with this video clip. Hopefully now that we've been through it all, you can see what I saw when I watched it and why I was so frustrated by this was you've got a whole lot of clips that are stuck together here, and very few of them, as you can see by the final count, are actually blatant sexism. You got some there that are confusing, and some there that are clearly not sexism at all. Unless, of course, you're now suggesting that it is sexist for men to actually treat women as equals in the way that they engage with women, by actually being just as assertive and strong and robust in their discussion and dialogue as they would be with a man, which I would kind of suggest is actually sexist and problematic in and of itself. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Left Foot Media.